Okay, well, hello everyone. My name is Rose, and again, I am one of the community outreach advocates at Women's Advocates. And today we will be discussing all about domestic violence within the media. And we're going to dive deeper into how domestic violence is often portrayed in the media and ways we can respond to that. But before we begin, I would like to share a bit more about Women's Advocate as an organization. And Women's Advocates is a nonprofit organization in St. Paul, Minnesota that offers all sorts of safety through our prevention programming, like these webinars, emergency shelters, advocacy services. We have housing stability services for victims, survivors of domestic violence. And we began in the early 1970s as a legal advice helpline, helping women who were seeking divorce. But the people who were working on these helplines very quickly caught on and found out that many of the women calling them were getting divorced because they were being abused by their spouse and by the relationships that they were in. And were then faced with a decision to either stay in their abusive relationships or leave the abuser and have no place to go, facing possible dangers of homelessness. So Women's Advocates decided to create a third option for these women, and that is where our shelter began. And in 1974, we purchased our first safe home to shelter survivors of domestic violence. And in the almost 50 years since, we've expanded our shelter from one home to 3 homes and have updated our mission statement to kind of better reflect what we do, which is walk with victim survivors and our community to break the cycle of domestic violence. This is our land acknowledgement. I will copy and paste it into the chat. So if you want access to it, you can absolutely get access to that. There you go. And I am just going to read it out loud for us very quickly before we move on. Women's Advocates works takes place on Dakota land. The area that is now St. Paul was stolen from the Dakota people by the American government through centuries of wars, broken treaties, and acts of cultural genocide. Through incredible perseverance and resistance, the Dakota are still here and strong. Native women and girls face the highest risk of domestic violence, sexual assault, and intimate partner homicide. And we express our gratitude for the Indigenous-led organizations who are working each day towards a world without domestic and sexual violence. And as an organization, we commit ourselves to supporting tribal sovereignty with the same fervor that we support the self-sovereignty of victim survivors. Okay. So with that, within the next 90 minutes that we have together, this webinar will be separated into 2 different parts. Part 1 being about how domestic violence is often portrayed in the media, and then we'll end with how we can respond and reflect upon this. And before we begin, I do kind of want to add a disclaimer. I want to preface first by making it clear that I am in no way telling you not to enjoy the media contents like movies, books, TV shows, everything else that the media has to offer. This webinar is simply for us to have a better understanding of how domestic violence is often portrayed and how we can further reflect on that without taking away the joy of enjoying ourselves and feeling free to indulge in the things that we love. And throughout the webinars, feel free to type in the chat if you have anything to say or add. Otherwise, feel free to simply sit back and listen, and I hope you can take away something important today at the end of the webinar as you leave. So jumping into part 1, of today's webinar, focusing on how domestic violence is often portrayed in the media. I am going to start us off with a poll. There we go. Please let me know if you can see it. Please take a moment to take the poll for me. I'd highly appreciate it. And so I'm going to start off talking mainly about what domestic violence is first before we dive on in. And if you were to kind of search up the definition of domestic violence, the definition that would pop up states that domestic violence is violent or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violence, abuse of a spouse or partner. And it's important to note that domestic violence does not stop at romantic partners, and domestic violence can also include people like friends, family members, roommates, and etc. And here on the screen, we've provided Women's Advocate's definition of what domestic violence is. And it is an intentional and systematic pattern of physical and psychological abuse, threats, intimidation, isolation, or economic coercion used by one person to exert power and control over another in the context of dating, family, or household relationship. Thank you all so much for taking the poll. I highly appreciate it. And it seems like a good amount of you have talked with certain people regarding violence and domestic violence. So this is good. And on the screen, I have listed just some of the very many characteristics of someone who is abusive. And of course, the list can be much longer than this. So if you work in this field, or if you've experienced something like this and you have any other characteristics that you think fit into the characteristics of an abusive person, you can feel free to also write it in the chat. I'd love to read them as we go. And I'd love to see what other characteristics you can think of. And many of these abusive behaviors are portrayed in characters from many well-known books, movies, and TV shows within the media. And oftentimes, many of these behaviors are romanticized and teaches us that these abusive characteristics are what we should look for in a loving partner or relationship. And I would like us to think more realistically about the romanticizing of abuse and be aware of how much and how often abuse is present. And when we consume these things from the media, just kind of being aware of what exactly we are seeing as we go. Okay, so on this slide, here are some very well-known movies and TV shows that showcases abuse. And if you'd like to, I'd recommend watching these or looking into them if you haven't already. And many of these shows and movies do portray many signs of abuse, and you can see for yourself how many of these abusive behaviors play out, and also take note of how these characters react to and deal with the abuse if you were to watch or have already watched these shows and films. If you have any personal favorites, movies or shows, more media contents like books and documentaries that you would like to share because you think they serve good educational purposes for the webinar today, feel free to share with us in the chat. I'm sure everybody would love to kind of bounce off one another and just kind of feed off one another as we go. And though many movies and TV shows may sometimes portray abuse inaccurately, there are those who give you a good perspective on what it's like to be in an abusive relationship. And many of these media contents can be great if you're trying to learn more about abuse and what abuse looks like. Movies and documentaries, TV shows and books can be great and educational if you kind of use them to your advantage. And so The examples that I have up on the screen for us, first off, is a show called Made on Netflix. It portrays the story of a mother named Alex and her child named Maddie, who attempts to leave the um, mother's abusive relationship and is faced with multiple roadblocks involving homelessness, financial issues, and lack of resources to help her and her child. Um, Shows and films like You on Netflix and Twilight showcases abuse through stalking, obsession, physical violence, and sometimes even murder. Um, while shows like Euphoria showcases substance abuse, physical assault, as well as emotional and mental abuse. And when seeing people get abused, it sparks our emotions. And while many of us may feel sympathetic, um, there are people who kind of romanticize and kind of enjoy these abusive content. Um, and there seems to be this thought that as long as it's all made up, abuse is perfectly fine and there's no harm in it. So the suffering of people can be appealing and exciting as long as it's not real. And we often overlook abusive behaviors within the media because many of these shows are mixed with other genres for our entertainment. Um, and I want to speak a little bit more about the different roles of men and women within the media and how we kind of view um, abusive behaviors between men and women. So a jealous, obsessive woman is often portrayed to be normal and often used for comedy purposes, whereas a jealous, obsessive male is portrayed to be dangerous and harmful. And many of these films that include controlling and obsessive men lead to themes like stalking, rape, or murder, and often falls under the drama, thriller, or horror genres. The examples I provided for us today are these two very different portrayals of how different we tend to view obsessive men and women within the media. This is a show called Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and it follows a woman named Rebecca, who follows a former love interest named Josh to Los Angeles in order to pursue him, even though in the past Josh has rejected Rebecca's advances. But as they grow up and they get older, she thinks that she can pursue Josh and follows him to a completely different state. Um, and though this is considered stalking, and stalking is a form of abuse, the audience tends to overlook that serious matter because this show is mixed with music and comedy, showcasing a much more lighthearted, entertaining view of abuse. And it makes the show overall just very fun and funny to watch. Um, as opposed to the popular film based off of a book called Lolita. This movie is about a middle-aged man who becomes obsessed and sexually attracted to an adolescent girl, a minor. Um, and this film is known for being a comedy, or isn't known for being a comedy, excuse me, or a lighthearted film, and many consider this film to be highly controversial. If you were to Google different stalking, murder stories, movies, you would see that a lot of the perpetrators are men. And if you were to kind of Google movies and TV shows that showcases women being perpetrators, it's often showcased women to be very, they make women out to be very sexy, very appealing, very attractive, or it's just used for comedy purposes where it's not that serious. You're not supposed to take it as serious. It's lighthearted fun. And so there is this really, really big difference within how women and men are portrayed within the media regarding abuse. Somebody said the main character in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend could be compared to Joe's stalker behavior. And you know what? That is very true. But um the themes overall of the shows are both very, very different. And so I'm glad you brought that up because we talked about you a couple slides ago, and now we're talking about Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And so being aware of that is very important, and thank you for bringing that up. Um, okay, we are now going to watch a clip of the show Made. This scene showcases how a partner can be loving 1 second and abusive the next. And just a quick warning, just in case, there is profanity involved. So if you are uncomfortable with that, or if there is anyone around you that you would not want to hear this, feel free to turn your volume down or do whatever you must to feel comfortable as we continue.
The armchair in the front lawn of our trailer belongs to me. And you can't tell under all the mold, but it's pink velvet. And when I moved into Sean's, it came with me. And when I told him I was pregnant, he sat me down on that chair and he brought me a cup of mint tea and he told me that he would hold my hand every step of the way. All tenderness. But then, when I told him that I wasn't gonna get an abortion, he took the chair and all the rest of my belongings and he threw them out into the rain. And he screamed at me and he told me that I was a fucking whore. And he said that I was ruining his bike trip and that I was also ruining his life. And he also said that he would never forgive me. And he hasn't.
What the fuck are you thinking? Fucking bitch! Think for a fucking second, Alex, for a fucking second!
And I've been afraid of him every day since. Anyway, something I'm working on right now.
Okay. So, yeah, that clip kind of just showcases how a partner can be very loving and accepting and okay 1 minute, and then suddenly it's not that anymore. Um, and it's abusive and it's hurtful. Um, and the show Made actually depicts domestic violence very well and abuse very well. So again, if you haven't already and you'd like to check it out, I highly encourage you to do so. Um, so the media depicts, all sorts of abuse towards women for entertainment purposes. And though we probably don't want to blame every individual's actions on the media, they're because they often know right from wrong, and many of these individuals causing harm know that they shouldn't be doing this. But it's important to know that seeing women being abused all the time does increase the likelihood of women facing abuse in real life. This puts women around the ages of 18 through 34 at a much higher risk of being abused. And it's also important to know that the representation of violence against women in the media has greatly increased over the years, with recent research suggesting that women are commonly depicted as victims and sex objects within the media, and portraying women in this way via pornography, pornographic movies, and music videos has been found to increase attitudes which are supportive of violence, specifically sexual violence against women. Um, and in relation to violence in general, research suggests that the media's portrayal of women as sex objects and victims tend to influence societal attitudes that are accepting of domestic violence against women. Okay, I have another poll for us to do. Let me launch that really quick. Okay. So if you can, again, and if you can see the poll, please do take the poll for me. I highly appreciate it. And this poll is about movie tropes. Which of these movie tropes do you consume the most? And if the ones that I have listed, you don't consume as much, you can feel free to write it in the chat about which movie tropes you prefer. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, you all, for taking this poll. I'm gonna give us a couple more seconds to take this poll. And as you all are taking this poll, I am going to continue talking a little bit more about movie tropes. And on this slide, we've listed a couple of movie tropes that can showcase what abuse looks like. First, we have the trope of if I can't have you, no one can. And this trope is known for portraying jealousy, envious, and dangerous acts of a character who is demanding to be loved. And this character does not take no for an answer and will often turn to things like kidnapping, rape, or murder in order to trap the person they are infatuated with. I am going to end the poll now and share the results. It seems like a lot of us are consuming the bad boy and good girl trope, or the if I can't have you, no one can trope. And these two are very, very common tropes, which is why I thought it was important to add it on this webinar. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we keep going with the webinar. But thank you all for taking that poll. This is very informational for me, the person doing this webinar. So thank you for that. And next we have the victim blaming trope. The media tends to justify abuse and violence by blaming the victim and saying things like, well, if you did not want your house robbed, you should have locked the door. Or if you didn't want to be raped, you shouldn't have worn that. And whether this is a real life thing or a made up scene from a movie, victim blaming happens all the time. And it's important to be aware of when this happens and how we internalize it when it does happen. And next we have the damsel in distress. This is also a very famous movie trope. And this trope showcases women who are weak and fragile and unable to speak up or fight for themselves. And these women are often waiting for a hero, a male hero, a straight male hero, to kind of swoop in and save them from a variety of abuse involving sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. And it also showcases that if you are a man and if you were to save a woman and if you aren't willing to put yourself in a situation full of violence and put your life on the line, then you are not the hero and you are not man enough. And so it's something to think about on both sides, from men and women, and how this really only involves straight men and straight women. You never really see anybody else involved within the damsel in distress trope. Um, and next is a really popular trope, I think, because of the poll, the bad boy and good girl trope. This trope often shows violent and aggressive behaviors from the male characters, and these actions are often justified. The female characters, deemed as the good girls, are then expected to save and fix these male characters who are said to be broken because of their past, their trauma, whatever is going on in their life, the way they are acting. They're young boys, and boys will be boys, and boys will act however they want. And it's up to the good girl to kind of swoop in and be the hero in this case and save the bad boy. And this, again, is a very, very popular trope within the media. And over here we have some more tropes that I want to touch upon. And some of these tropes also, well, not some, all of these tropes, excuse me, also showcases abuse. The tough love trope shows individuals treating others horribly in order to make them quote unquote better, or they're trying to toughen them up with the tough love and the basically abuse that they are showing towards different individuals. And within this trope, we see individuals hurting others, then claiming that abuse is out of love and care. They're doing this because they want what's best for the individuals that they are hurting. Then we have the fetishized abuser, and this trope makes the abuser attractive and sexy and charming, in order for other characters and for the audience to kind of fall in love with them. And their abusive actions are often justified and ignored because it makes us think that it's not really abuse if you enjoy the abuse. If this character that they are abusing is okay with the abuse, but they enjoy the abuse, or this abuser is just a very attractive individual, then everything else that they do is justified and the abuse isn't actually abuse, which is very much false and not true. And next we have the trope where characters are abusing their power and therefore abusing other people in order to get what they want. And last but not least, the trope that I want to touch up on is substance abuse. And this trope often involves a lot of mental and emotional, but also physical abuse. And it showcases that these individuals being abused or is being abused or is abusing others as they battle with addiction and substance abuse. And oftentimes their actions are also justified because they are addicted to a type of drug or a certain substance. And so therefore, everything that they're doing, it's not really who they are. They are actually very sweet when they're not, high, or when they're sober. And then we kind of overlook that abuse as well. And next, I want to talk more about the romanticizing of abuse. So there are many media portrayals of being abused, of abuse being tolerated, and we begin to kind of internalize abuse, claiming that it's love. Abuse is love. And there are tropes and stories where if a victim stays with their abusers, it's considered true love since they are willing to set aside the abusive and toxic behaviors in order to stay with their abusive partners. And as the audience, I think part of our job is to counter that because we want to make it clear that love does not involve abuse, and we also do not want to fall into victim blaming if we were to see a situation like this in real life. Another way the media tends to kind of romanticize abuse is by telling us that if a victim chooses to stay with their abusers, that's loyalty. And it teaches us that in order to be loyal, loving, and a good partner, we must stay with our abuser, even if we are being abused by them. And this is, of course, not the case. Your love and your loyalty does not stand on being abused. It does not stand on tolerating abuse. And you are not a terrible person if you choose to walk away from someone who is abusive towards you. Now, jealousy is a really popular one. It tricks us into thinking that if someone is jealous of you, they care for you, they love you. But in real life, know that jealousy may, in many ways, can be harmful and dangerous. It can lead to many types of physical, mental, and emotional abuse. And with something like Stockholm syndrome, it's not to be not necessarily to be liked or romanticized either, because people who have gone through Stockholm syndrome in real life have said that they kind of then live with feelings of guilt, fear, and depression when dealing with something like Stockholm syndrome in real life. And though all of these are kind of portrayed in the media, I think it would be good for us to kind of reflect on that in real life and think about how we kind of internalized all these messages. Okay, here I have another video from a movie called I, Tanya. Same as the last video, there is profanity, so do what you must to feel comfortable as we continue to watch this video. And the video will not play on the webinar, so I am going to have to share a different. I might have to stop share for a second and then let me share my screen again. If the video, thank you all for being patient with me. Let me see the screen.
Jeff?
I
Jeff?
have your bag.
You can't be here.
Listen,
okay?
I have your bag.
You can't be here.
Let
You
me
can't
come
be
in for a
within
second.
100
Can I
feet
not
of me.
drop
If
something
you don't
off
fuck off, I'm calling the cops, okay?
Baby. Fucking legs, you fucking cunt. Fuck!
Jeff, get the fuck out of my hair. Get the...
Hey! I'm gonna fucking kill you. You want me to do that?
You fucking kidding me?
You want me to kill you?
You're gonna put a fucking gun in my...
You want me to kill myself?
Stop it!
Which is it?
Stop it!
You...
Jeff, I am fucking serious. I'm serious. Give me the fucking gun.
I will fucking
This is not...
kill you.
This is not a fucking
You don't need
joke.
your fucking purse. You don't need anybody. You need me.
Okay.
All right? That's it.
Okay. Okay. Just put down the gun. Put down the fucking gun.
Just...
Jeff! Fucking stop it! Give me the gun! Give me the fucking gun!
I can think of younger days when living for my life.
Stand back.
Was everything
Stand back. Everything is fine.
A loaded gun, what the fuck?
I could never see tomorrow. But I was told about the sorrow. How could you mend a broken heart? How can you stop the rain from falling down?
God damn it!
How can you stop the sun from shining? What makes the world go round?
Fucking this. You made me fucking do. I'll fucking kill you if you say anything.
This broken
Ah.
man. How can a loser ever win? Please help me.
Good evening.
Broken heart. And let me live.
I'm gonna need you to get out of the car.
Okay.
I can still feel the breeze that rustles through the
Didn't say anything about the blood. Took 2 guns out of the truck and alcohol, and then just placed me there with him,
Kind of like Christy.
which is why I don't trust the authorities or anyone.
Jeff can talk his way out of anything. Never talk to him.
Hmm. Bring us back. But not perfect. Okay, perfect. Well, I think that film did a great job at telling Tanya's story, but also showcasing what abuse looks like. And you can tell just how scared she was, and saw how people around her saw what had happened. No one really did anything, even though there was, a gun in their face. And authorities also ignored that she was bleeding and that they did nothing to try and help her. And one thing to kind of take away from that I want people to know is that a lot of this happens in real life all the time. And another reason why we want to be aware of the things we watch and how we internalize it and realize how terrifying it can be if a situation like this were to happen to somebody in real life. How would they feel? How will it play out? And again, I have one more poll for us to do here. Okay. So if you all can take this poll for me, which of these music genres do you listen to the most? We're going to jump a little bit more into music now. The media is so broad, and there's only so much we can cover in 90 minutes. So we are going to jump into music. And I'd highly appreciate it if you guys can take this poll for me. And thank you to all of you who are taking it right now. If there is another music genre that's not listed, you can totally write it in the chat. Let us know what music genre you like to listen to. And I'm going to give us a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds here to do this poll. And you look at the chat. somebody wants a list of these movies in the post email, you will absolutely get those. If you have been writing in the chat, thank you for doing that. Okay. I am going to end the poll now and share the results with us. A lot of people said pop music or Latin music, which is great. Again, good for me to know as the facilitator of this webinar. Thank you all for taking that poll. And yeah, we're going to jump more into music within the media. And so aside from the things we watch, we can also learn a lot from the things we hear. And I want to talk a bit more about music and how we internalize abuse through music and through the music that we listen to. Again, to preface, again, not saying that you can't listen to this music or that you shouldn't or you should stop. Do whatever you must, enjoy what you enjoy. Just, it's nice to be aware of how much abuse is present in the media and how we kind of overlook that. So I've listed music like pop music, hip hop, country, rock music, Latin music, classical music. But there is still so many different genres of music out there that we do not have time to cover every single one. But again, if you have one that is not on the list, feel free to write it in the chat. And on the screen, I've listed the basic definitions of these music genres and where they originated from. And so talking more about the impact of music, research has found that music has a positive impact on the psychological qualities of life. And so our connection to music can be extremely personal, vulnerable, or complicated depending on our mood, our preferences, and our social situations. So music can also be used as therapy to improve our health and overall well-being. So with that being said, this shows why music is such a powerful tool for harm or for good. And this is not to put down any specific genre or artist. Again, you can like what you like and you are encouraged to keep listening to what you want. But just like with films and TV shows, it's good to be aware of what we're consuming and how we then internalize all of that. On the screen, I listed some song lyrics from certain songs that I listen to, and these are just lyrics that kind of touch base on violence, domestic violence, abuse, and again, something to kind of just be aware of. And music can be used to kind of learn more about domestic violence, just like films and movies. And there are many other artists out there who have written songs about abuse to kind of spread awareness about abuse or kind of have themes of abuse and domestic violence within their music. So rather than, eliminating the things you love, whether that's film or music, keep listening to them, keep watching them, as it can kind of teach us so much about abuse and how it's portrayed in the media. And simply just being more aware of how abuse is literally all around us. And simply realize that abuse is, it goes a long way. It's present everywhere within the media that and the contents that we consume. And if you pay attention, you'll realize that abuse and art connected to abuse is kind of everywhere. And that's something to think about. And we also kind of urge you to take it seriously, as you never know when you'll come across something like abuse in real life, whether that's with yourself or with certain people you know, or people you already know that have gone through things like this, or maybe you have already gone through things like this. Simply being aware of the media that we consume how abuse is all around us, um, and how we kind of then internalize all of that and how we think about it, and if we've ever experienced abuse ourselves or if we've seen other people experience abuse. It's just something to kind of reflect on. Speaking of reflecting, we are going to move on to part 2 of today's webinar. And it's kind of touching up on responding and reflecting on domestic violence and the stuff that we have consumed. So let's pay attention to the reality and the non-reality of domestic violence. Something made up in a movie or TV show scene can very quickly become yours or someone else's reality. And though we may not agree with abuse and domestic violence, the content we consume can make us more accepting of it. And that's equally not okay. When reflecting or learning more about domestic violence, it's always important to know that domestic violence is not a one-time thing. An abuser, does not only hurt you once. The abuser will most likely hurt you again, and the cycle of abuse will continue over and over again. And though there's very little proof that media violence will influence abusive behavior, the media violence we see and hear can change our perspective on how much and how long we are willing to accept and tolerate abuse. And there are studies showing that when you view a lot of violent, sexually violent and misogynistic content, you become more accepting of those behaviors, and those individuals are more likely to accept the belief that things like rape and violence is acceptable, and often resort to victim blaming in order to kind of justify violent and abusive behaviors. And so to make things very clear, right off the bat, we do not justify domestic violence. And when further reflecting upon abuse, we want to constantly remind ourselves that abuse is not okay, and no one should excuse the actions of those who are abusive. And when you see or come across these types of content within the media, it's important to think about what can and should be done if the made-up abuse you saw on TV was real. And if it hasn't been made clear already, I want everyone to know that there are various types of abuse. And domestic violence is not always physical violence. Things like emotional violence, verbal violence, sexual assault, financial abuse, and digital violence all fall under the domestic violence umbrella. And it's a very, very broad topic when it comes to abuse, and abuse is not always physical. And when dealing with domestic violence in real life, oftentimes it's important to know the abusive tendencies that can possibly escalate someone to be abusive. There's also a variety of factors that can escalate someone's abusive tendencies, but we've listed some on our screen, ranging from drug and alcohol abuse, poverty, work stress, low self-esteem, and just a lot more, as you can see on the screen. Okay, and many of us have been conditioned to kind of not recognize abusive behaviors as abuse. There are many social norms and that excuse abuse or lead us to expect it and accept it as a longer and regular part of a relationship. Again, tying back to what we were talking about before, if somebody is abusive, you tend to think it's because they love you, or the media makes you think, well, because they love you, they are jealous, they are abusive, and it's okay, you should excuse it, but it's really not. And sometimes we can kind of fall into that mindset where we start to kind of excuse the abusive behaviors ourselves. Here are many of the examples of the ways that these norms can kind of show up. This includes jealousy. Jealousy shows that he cares for and loves their partners. That sentiment is depicted in countless romantic songs, shows, and movies as something to look for, as evidence that someone cares. When in reality, this behavior is a display of mistrust, insecurity, and control. Many of these other examples that you see on the screen are also rooted in misogyny, patriarchal beliefs, acceptance of coercion, and show how many aspects of our culture devalues consent, respect, and agency. It's to also be made clear that the abusive person struggling with their mental health or witnessing abuse as a child are not justifiable reasons for abuse. And always remember that domestic violence is a choice, and the only one responsible for abuse is the person using it. And so the impact of domestic violence on a survivor is similar to that of a sickness that has the potential to kind of impact all systems and all dimensions of a person's well-being. Even after the abuse, the person has stopped abusing them. We've touched up prior on the fact that domestic violence is not a one-time incident, and the cycle of violence will always repeat itself. And the abuse kind of trickles down, impacting every aspect of life and messes with the well-being of a victim survivor. Again, touching up on the fact that abuse isn't always physical, and there are just a bunch of different well-beings listed on the screen here that showcases what abuse can impact and how it can affect a victim survivor of domestic violence. And we spoke briefly about tropes of victim blaming, and the truth is, victim blaming happens all the time in real life, and we have the ability to shift our culture from automatic victim blaming and minimizing the impact of abuse to centering validation, belief, and autonomy of survivors, and valuing consent, respect, and compassion. On the screen, we'll see questions and phrases we often hear in our society about abuse survivors, and many of which can be a second experience of trauma. So many of these victim blamings can cause more trauma. It can be very triggering. Victim blaming includes asking questions like, did you provoke them? Why did you leave? Are you sure that happened? Why did you wear this? Why did you do that? And oftentimes these responses start to mimic the abuser's voice and show the survivor that the abuser was right, which is not the case. And on the right are phrases and questions that challenge the abusive person's voice and start to kind of prove them wrong. And these are the phrases that we want to stick with when we are trying to validate the victim survivors of domestic violence. This shows that people do care for them and that people will listen and believe them. People will stand by them and support them, especially when it's extremely difficult. And these phrases all start to contribute to the empowerment of the survivor. With any chance you get to empower a victim survivor of domestic violence, we highly encourage you to do so to the best of your abilities, because they need it, and it can be a great it can be very empowering and a great new fresh start for them to kind of start to believe themselves, knowing that somebody else believes them and their experiences too. When reflecting on the effects that the media has on us, it's important to understand and be aware with how we personally view domestic violence right now. Um, it's all it's also important to be honest with ourselves and think about whether or not we've excused violent and abusive behaviors in the past or even now in the present. If you have, do not worry. That is why we are here today. It does not make you a bad person. It does not automatically mean that you do not care or have sympathy for victim survivors of domestic violence. We try to do what we can when we can, and we try our best to avoid putting ourselves in those violent situations too. Um, but it's good to be aware of how the media can shape our perspective on abuse. Again, this webinar, the message overall that I am trying to portray is not trying to force you to not enjoy the things you love. If anything, I highly encourage you to keep enjoying the media contents you like, and maybe explore more, which is why I really wanted us to kind of share in the chat as we go. You can start to kind of indulge in the things that you like, but you can also start to expand and explore your interests, because the media can be very powerful and helpful if we kind of start to use it to our advantage. And here at Women's Advocates, we emphasize the importance of holistic safety. Um, we've already talked about how abuse impacts all dimensions of wellness and all types of safety. Holistic safety includes physical, social, emotional, intellectual, digital, financial, spiritual aspects of safety. Um, and it's important that our safety plan addresses all of these dimensions. So sometimes when working with a victim survivor or supporting one as a friend, we should always remind ourselves that abuse creates more than physical scars, and therefore showing sympathy for all dimensions of wellness is highly recommended. However, it's also important to remember, do not neglect yourself and your well-being, and show love and support to your own holistic safety. Um, you can learn more by downloading our personalized safety plan worksheet and watching our safety plan webinars on our YouTube channel at Women's Advocates. Both of these are on the screen and will be available to you when you receive the slides. And I can also put them in the chat right now for all of us to view. Is to our safety planning videos on YouTube, if it will work with me. There we go. Oh. Okay, and moving on to holding someone who is abusive accountable, because this is a very important message that we kind of want to give out there. People who use abuse are capable of being held accountable for their actions as much as they may try to avoid it. Statistically speaking, it is very likely that you have a survivor of abuse in your life, and it is equally as likely that you have someone who uses abuse in your life. And we say this not to scare you or worry you, but because it is the reality, and we are faced with another opportunity to support survivors through doing what we can to place responsibility for the abuse where it belongs, And that is with the abusive person. The abusive person is completely capable of being held accountable for their actions. Um, and people who use abusive behaviors need people in their lives to challenge those behaviors and beliefs that fuel them. And they need people who believe survivors, um, who set positive examples, who can remind them that their actions are a choice and that other people choose to behave differently. And if you can be that person for someone, please consider doing so. There are links on the screen to more quizzes that can be used as tools. And all of these will be available to you as you get access to the PowerPoint slides later on. But if you can be that person to kind of showcase change, it would be great. Here are just some more resources available. On the left are specific resources for people in Minnesota, and on the right are national and international resources to explore if they apply to you. Here are some more reading. Throughout the webinar, we had readings and sources listed throughout. So here's some more recommendations for learning more about domestic violence. There are different movie tropes, music, and violence against women. It's all listed here. And thank you for your commitment to survivors' safety today. And thank you all for being here. Here are specific contact information, the ways to get in touch with our crisis resource advocates. And you do not have to live in Minnesota or be or a specific county to reach out to us. Feel free to do so. And here is just something about our online survivor support group. We host an online survivor support group, so feel free to scan this QR code that's on the screen and fill out the forms to join us, or tell people about us who have gone through abuse and domestic violence and abusive relationships, and you want to tell them more about us to join our support group. Feel free to do so. We'd highly appreciate that. And this is our pop-up advocacy. Every Tuesday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. we are at the Rondo Community Library. Come and talk to us about healthy relationships and domestic violence. We also have a lot of freebies to give out. So if you ever need anything, feel free to come and talk to us. We are literally by the front door. Same for the Ramsey County WIC office at the Non-American Partnership office. Every Thursday from 11:30 to 3:30, we will be there. So if you need to talk to us, get in touch with us, feel free to come talk to us. We would love to talk to you. And thank you all today for being here for this webinar. If you can, and if you want to, I am going to copy paste this post-webinar survey into the chat. And if you can take that survey for me, I'd highly appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. And yes, stay connected with us through our social media platforms. You can scan this QR code on the screen to download a copy of this presentation and kind of view for yourself the different movies, the different tropes, the different music, everything that we talked about. Feel free to do so if you wish. And thank you, everybody. Thank you all for being here today and watching this webinar. I highly, highly appreciate it. For serving link, yes. If you'd like, I can also copy paste in the chat again. So you can click on it. Let me do that very quickly. There we go. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. Certificate link in the chat. That would be, let me see. I'm pretty sure that would all be emailed sent to you after the webinar for the certificate links. So yes, I believe so. Yeah, so if you're looking for certificate links, that will be sent to you after the webinar. But yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for sticking till the end. I highly, highly appreciate it. Oh, Mary Beth, for the certificates, thank you so much, Mary Beth. Thank you so much for that. Feel free to, yeah, so feel free to stay connected with us. Again, come meet us at Rondo and the WIC office. We'd love to talk with you about domestic violence, and I hope you took away something today regarding domestic violence in the media.